My mother-in-law spent 3 years trying to destroy everything I built from nothing, and when she planted false accusations at my workplace, I nearly lost it all. But the night she thought she'd finally one turned into the night, everyone saw exactly who she really was. I found out my mother-in-law tried to get me fired on a Tuesday. Not from her, not from my husband, from a coworker who pulled me into the break room with this look on her face like someone had died. "Nadia, we need to talk," she said. "There's something going around and you need to hear it before HR does." But let me back up, way up, because this story doesn't start in that break room. It starts years before that, and honestly, if I don't give you the full picture, none of what happened at the gala is going to make sense. My name is Nadia. I'm 34 now. I grew up in a situation that most people would describe as rough, though I hate that word. My mom raised me and my two younger brothers alone after my dad left when I was 9. We lived in a series of apartments that got smaller and cheaper as the years went on. There were months where dinner was cereal. There were stretches where the lights got shut off and my mom would pretend it was an adventure, like camping indoors. I'm not saying this for sympathy. I'm saying it because everything I have now, I built, every single thing. I worked 2 jobs through community college. I transferred to a state university on a partial scholarship and covered the rest with loans and overnight shifts at a warehouse. I got a degree in finance, then spent my 20s grinding my way up in corporate accounting. By 28, I was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized manufacturing company. By 30, I was promoted to assistant controller. I bought my first house at 31, paid off my student loans by 32. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I was stable. I was proud. I had clawed my way to a life that felt secure, and nobody handed me a single cent of it. Then I met Derek. Derek was kind, smart, a little quiet. He worked in supply chain management at a different company. We met at a networking event, which I know sounds boring, but he made me laugh so hard I almost choked on a shrimp cocktail. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. I loved Derek, I still do, but loving Derek meant inheriting his mother, Vivian. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, the red flags were all there from the very first dinner. Vivian Holt was the kind of woman who measured people by their zip code. She dressed like she was attending a benefit even when she was going to the grocery store. She name-dropped constantly. She was on the board of 2 local charities and the PTA of a school her kids hadn't attended in over a decade. She volunteered not because she cared, but because it put her in rooms with people who had influence. The first time I met her, she smiled at me, looked me up and down, and said, "So you're the girl from the other side of town." Derek laughed nervously and said she was joking. She wasn't joking. Over the next few months, Vivian made her feelings about me very clear, though always in ways that gave her plausible deniability. She'd ask about my family and then make little comments. "Oh, your mother never remarried? That must have been so hard." Or, "Did you ever think about going to a real university?" She once asked me what my father did for a living. When I told her I hadn't spoken to him in over 20 years, she actually said, "Well, that explains a lot." Derek always defended me, but in a soft way. He'd say, "Mom, come on," or change the subject. He never drew a hard line. I think part of him believed she'd come around once she got to know me. And honestly, part of me believed that too. Maybe I was naive, but I thought if I just kept being kind, kept being successful, kept showing her that I wasn't whatever she imagined I was, she'd eventually accept me. She didn't. What she did instead was launch a quiet, calculated campaign to make me look bad in every room she entered. It started small. She'd tell Derek's relatives that I was difficult or controlling. She told his aunt that I made Derek pay for everything, which was a lie. We split finances 50-50 from the beginning. She told one of Derek's cousins that I had a past, and when the cousin asked what that meant, Vivian just raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh, I shouldn't say." She was a social climber who used everyone around her like stepping stones, and I was the rock in her path that she couldn't step over. When Derek and I got married, Vivian wore a cream-colored dress. Not white, not ivory. Cream, close enough to make a statement but far enough to deny it. At the reception, she gave a toast that was technically about us but was really about her. How she raised Derek, how she sacrificed, how she hoped he'd find balance in his new life. She looked right at me when she said balance. I bit my tongue, I smiled. I drank champagne and told myself it was just one night. But it wasn't just one night. It was every holiday, every family dinner, every birthday party, every phone call where Derek would hang up and look drained because his mother had spent 20 minutes subtly tearing me apart. For about 2 years after the wedding, it was manageable. Annoying and hurtful, but manageable. I focused on my career. I focused on my marriage. I tried to keep Vivian at arm's length without making Derek feel like he had to choose. Then everything changed. Vivian's husband, Derek's father Gerald, retired. And when Gerald retired, his income dropped significantly. They'd been living above their means for years, credit cards, a house that was too big, memberships to clubs they couldn't actually afford. Gerald had always made decent money, but Vivian spent it faster than it came in. Suddenly, Vivian needed things. She needed help with the mortgage. She needed someone to co-sign on a car. She needed money for a small procedure that insurance wouldn't cover. And she started looking at me and Derek like we were her personal safety net. When we said no, politely, with genuine offers to help them create a budget, Vivian lost it. Not publicly, never publicly. Vivian was too smart for that, but privately, to Derek, she called me greedy. She said I was turning her son against her. She said I was hoarding money that should go to family. Keep in mind, this woman had never given me a single dollar. She hadn't helped with the wedding. She hadn't helped with our house. She hadn't contributed to anything in our lives. But she felt entitled to what I had because her son's name was on the same mailbox as mine. This was around the time I got a new position. I'd been recruited by a much larger company, a regional firm with about 400 employees. They brought me on as a controller. It was a significant step up, better pay, better title, real authority. I was thrilled. Vivian found out about the new job because Derek mentioned it at a family dinner. I remember her face when she heard the salary range. Something shifted behind her eyes. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that moment mattered. That was when she started planning. See, here's the thing about Vivian that took me way too long to understand. She didn't just dislike me because of where I came from. She resented me because I'd succeeded despite where I came from. My existence disproved everything she believed about people like me, and the more successful I became, the more threatened she felt. About 6 months into my new role, I started noticing something weird. Small things. A couple of coworkers who had been friendly suddenly became distant. My boss, who had always been supportive, started asking oddly specific questions about expense reports and vendor contracts. Nothing accusatory, just probing in a way that felt off. I figured it was just new job jitters. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then came that Tuesday in the break room. My coworker, Lisa, sat me down and told me that someone had contacted HR. An anonymous tip had been submitted claiming that I was embezzling funds, that I was creating fake vendor accounts and routing company money into personal accounts. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "That's insane," I said. "That's completely insane." Lisa nodded. "I know, but they're taking it seriously. There's going to be an internal investigation." I went numb. I literally couldn't feel my hands. I had spent my entire career building a reputation for integrity. I had never so much as rounded a mileage report in my favor, and now someone was accusing me of theft. The next few weeks were a nightmare. HR brought in an outside auditor. I was put on a kind of informal probation, not suspended, but pulled off certain projects. My access to some financial systems was temporarily restricted. People noticed. Of course they noticed. I could feel the whispers. I could see the way certain people looked at me in meetings. I went from being the confident new controller to the woman under investigation. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I cried in the shower every morning and then put on a brave face for work. Derek was supportive, but I could tell he didn't fully understand how devastating this was. To him, it was a misunderstanding that would get sorted out. To me, it was my entire identity being ripped apart. And then I found out who was behind it. It wasn't the auditors who told me. It was a combination of things. First, the anonymous tip had included details that only someone with specific knowledge of my work setup would know. The fake vendor names that were cited in the accusation matched companies that didn't exist, but the account numbers referenced in the tip were structured in a way that mimicked our actual vendor system. someone had done homework. Someone who maybe had access to a conversation where I'd mentioned how our vendor payment system worked. I remembered a dinner, about 2 months before the tip was filed. Vivian had been at our house, and she'd been unusually interested in my work. She'd asked questions about what a controller does, how payments get approved, how money moves. I thought she was being polite for once. I actually felt good about it. I'd explained the basics, probably said too much because I was so desperate for her to see me as competent. She used every word I said against me. The second clue was the email address used to submit the tip. The company's HR department had a policy of not revealing sources, but during the investigation, a clerical error led to the email address being partially visible on a document that was shared with me as part of the review process. It was a throwaway Gmail address, but the username was a combination of letters that matched Vivian's maiden name and birth year. I felt sick, genuinely physically sick. I told Derek that night. I showed him the email fragment. I walked him through the timeline. I watched his face go from confusion to realization to something I'd never seen in him before, this deep, heavy shame. She wouldn't, he said, but he didn't sound sure. Derek, she did. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, I'll talk to her. No, I said, not yet. I need to handle this the right way. And I meant it, because here's what Vivian didn't understand about me. I didn't survive my childhood by being passive. I didn't build my career by letting people walk over me. I had just spent so long trying to be the bigger person with her that she mistook my patience for weakness. That was her biggest mistake. The investigation took about 3 more weeks to fully resolve. The auditors found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Every account was clean, every payment was documented, every transaction had a paper trail. I was cleared completely. But clearing my name wasn't enough. The damage had been done. People at work still looked at me sideways. My boss was supportive but awkward about it. The stain of an accusation like that doesn't just wash off. You don't just go back to normal after your colleagues spent a month wondering if you were a criminal. I needed more than vindication. I needed the truth to come out, and I needed it to come out in a way that Vivian couldn't spin, deny, or talk her way out of. Enter Margaret Chen. Margaret was a community leader in our area. She ran a local business alliance, sat on the city council, and was involved in about a dozen civic organizations. She was respected by everyone, the kind of person whose opinion carried weight. She was also a client of our company and someone I'd gotten to know through work. More importantly, Margaret had known Vivian for years. They moved in similar social circles, though Margaret actually earned her place while Vivian performed hers. Margaret once told me, quietly, at a fundraiser, that she'd always found Vivian exhausting but mostly harmless. I decided to trust Margaret with what had happened. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning. I laid everything out. The years of hostility, the financial requests, the anonymous tip, the email address, the investigation, all of it. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her cup and said, "Nadia, this woman tried to destroy your livelihood." "Yes," I said. "And you want to handle this without lawyers?" "For now, I want her to face what she did, but I want it to happen in a way where she can't play victim." Margaret thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "The company gala is in 3 weeks." Our company held an annual gala every spring. It was a big deal. Clients, partners, local business leaders, even some politicians showed up. It was part networking event, part celebration, part PR showcase. And that year, because of my role, I was expected to attend and even give a brief presentation on the company's financial health for the coming year. Margaret was invited as a client and community partner. And here's the part that made everything click into place. Vivian had somehow gotten herself onto the guest list. I later found out that Vivian had been pestering Gerald's former business partner, who had a connection to our CEO, for an invite. She saw the gala as a chance to network, to insert herself into a new social circle now that Gerald's retirement had shrunk her world. She probably also wanted to watch me squirm in public, expecting that the investigation had left me vulnerable and weak. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing, not just my presentation, but a quiet, careful documentation of everything Vivian had done. I worked with our IT department, with their permission, to formally trace the anonymous tip email. The results confirmed what I already knew. The IP address associated with the email came from a device that had been connected to a network at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Vivian's house. The email was created the same week Vivian visited and asked me all those questions. I also pulled together a timeline. Every nasty comment, every manipulation, every lie she'd told about me to Derek's family. I had text messages, voicemails she'd left Derek that he'd saved, and even a recording Derek had made with her knowledge actually of a phone call where she called me, and I quote, "a gutter girl playing dress-up." Derek was fully on board by this point. Finding out what his mother did to my career broke something in him, not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet reckoning. He sat at the kitchen table one night and said, "I should have stopped this a long time ago. I kept thinking she'd get tired of it. I was wrong." I held his hand and said, "We stop it now." The night of the gala arrived. It was held at a hotel ballroom downtown. White tablecloths, string quartet, the whole thing. I wore a navy blue dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Not because I was trying to look good for Vivian, but because I wanted to feel strong. And that dress made me feel like armor. Vivian arrived in a sequined silver dress, naturally making sure every head turned. She was working the room within minutes, shaking hands, complimenting wives, laughing at jokes made by men with money. She was in her element, or at least she thought she was. She saw me across the room and gave me this smile. This thin, victorious little smile, like she'd already won, like the investigation had been enough to put me in my place. "Nadia, darling," she said when she walked over. "You look nice. I'm surprised they let you give a speech tonight after everything." "After what?" I said calmly. She tilted her head. "Oh, you know, the unpleasantness at work. I heard there was some kind of audit situation." "Funny you should mention that," I said, "because I'd love to talk about it later tonight." She blinked just once, then recovered her smile. The first part of the evening went normally. Dinner, networking, a speech from the CEO. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the podium with my notes. The room had maybe 200 people. Derek was at our table. Margaret was at hers, near the front. Vivian was at a table near the middle, sitting next to some executive's wife she'd latched onto. I gave my financial presentation. It went well. The numbers were strong, people clapped, and then, instead of stepping down, I paused. "If you'll indulge me for one more minute," I said, "I want to address something personal." The room got quiet. My boss looked at me from his seat with a slightly alarmed expression, but I kept going. "Some of you may have heard that I was recently the subject of an internal investigation. I want to be transparent about that. An anonymous tip was submitted to our HR department accusing me of financial misconduct. I was fully investigated by an independent auditor, and I was completely cleared. There was zero evidence of wrongdoing because there was no wrongdoing." A murmur rippled through the room. I could see Vivian's posture stiffen just slightly. "But what concerns me," I continued, "is not that the investigation happened. Companies should take such claims seriously. What concerns me is that the accusation was fabricated, deliberately and maliciously, and I now know who submitted it." The room went dead silent. "I'm not going to name names from this podium," I said. "That's not what tonight is about, but I want everyone in this room to know that I take my integrity seriously. I built my career from nothing. I didn't inherit connections or wealth. I earned every promotion, every dollar, every opportunity through honest work. And I will not allow anyone, no matter who they are, to take that from me." I looked directly at Vivian. I didn't say her name. I didn't point. I just looked at her. And I saw it. That flicker of panic behind her carefully composed face. "Thank you," I said and stepped down. The applause was louder than it had been for the financial presentation. People were looking around, curious, buzzing, but the real moment came after. Margaret stood up from her table and walked over to a group of people that included 2 city council members and the president of the local chamber of commerce. I didn't hear exactly what she said, but I found out later. She told them, calmly and factually, that she had been made aware of a situation involving a malicious false report filed against a respected professional. That the source of the report was someone present at the gala. and that she believed it was important for the community to know that Nadia Reeves had been fully exonerated and that the person responsible should be held accountable. She didn't name Vivian either. She didn't have to. Because within 20 minutes, people were connecting dots. Vivian was my mother-in-law. Everyone in that room knew that. And when the whispers started, Vivian's carefully constructed social persona began to crack. I watched it happen from across the room. First, a woman Vivian had been chatting with excused herself to go to the bathroom and never came back to the conversation. Then a couple who Vivian had been trying to impress suddenly needed to make a phone call. One by one, people started creating distance. Vivian noticed. Of course she noticed. Her face went from composed to strained to something close to desperate. She tried to pull Gerald aside, but he was already sitting alone at their table, staring at his hands. Then Derek walked over to her. I couldn't hear what he said because the music was playing and people were mingling around us, but I could see his face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He was calm in a way that was almost worse. He spoke to her for maybe 2 minutes. She tried to interrupt several times. He held up his hand each time and kept talking. When he was done, Vivian's eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, but wet. She grabbed her clutch and walked toward the exit. Gerald followed a few steps behind. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. After they left, a few people came up to me. My boss, a couple of senior partners, Margaret. They all said variations of the same thing, that they were sorry for what I'd gone through, that they admired how I handled it, that the investigation had been taken seriously, but that it was clear now that it was a targeted attack. One of the senior partners, a man named Tom who had been with the company for 20 years, shook my hand and said, "For what it's worth, nobody who matters ever doubted you." I wanted to believe him. I mostly did. Derek and I drove home in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Just the kind where two people are processing something enormous and don't have the words yet. When we got home, he sat on the couch and said, "I told her that if she doesn't get help, real professional help, she's not welcome in our lives anymore." What did she say? She said I was choosing you over her. And he looked at me. I said yes. I sat down next to him, and we just stayed there for a long time. The fallout over the next few weeks was significant. Vivian's social standing, the thing she valued more than anything, crumbled. Margaret, true to her nature, didn't gossip, but she also didn't protect Vivian. When people asked her what happened, she told the truth. Calmly, factually, and in a community where reputation is currency, the truth was devastating. Vivian was quietly removed from one of her charity boards. The PTA position she still clung to despite having no children in the school became untenable when other parents started asking questions. Her circle of friends, many of whom had always suspected she was more performance than substance, began to distance themselves. Gerald, to his credit, was horrified by what Vivian had done. He told Derek he had no idea about the false report. He apologized to me directly, in person, sitting at our kitchen table with tears in his eyes. "I failed you," he said. "I knew she was difficult and I let it go on too long." I told him it wasn't his fault, and I meant it. Gerald had always been kind to me in his quiet way. He was just a man who had spent decades managing his wife's worst impulses instead of confronting them. Vivian, for her part, went through what I can only describe as a breakdown. Not a dramatic, movie-style collapse, more like a slow unraveling. She stopped going out. She stopped calling people. She stopped getting dressed up. Gerald said she spent most of her days in bed, alternating between anger and what seemed like genuine depression. Derek held firm on his ultimatum. No contact until she got professional help. Real therapy. Not a single session to check a box, but committed, ongoing therapy. It took about 6 weeks before Vivian agreed. I think the isolation broke her. She had built her entire identity around being seen, being admired, being at the center of things. Without that, she didn't know who she was. She started seeing a therapist twice a week. Gerald told us that the therapist diagnosed her with narcissistic personality traits, though I never saw the actual diagnosis, and I'm not sure Vivian would have shared it. She also started what Gerald described as a kind of rehabilitation process, learning to recognize her patterns of behavior, her need for control, her habit of tearing others down to elevate herself. I want to be honest about something. I didn't feel good about Vivian's pain. I know some people reading this might expect me to say I was thrilled to watch her suffer. I wasn't. There's no satisfaction in watching someone's life fall apart, even someone who tried to destroy yours. What I felt was relief. Deep, bone-level relief. Like I'd been carrying a boulder on my back for years, and someone finally helped me set it down. The months that followed were a slow process of rebuilding. Not just my reputation at work, but my sense of self. The investigation had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. For a while, I second-guessed every decision I made. I triple-checked every report. I stayed late not because I needed to, but because I was terrified of giving anyone a reason to doubt me again. My boss pulled me into his office about 2 months after the gala. He closed the door and said, "Nadia, I owe you an apology." I wasn't expecting that. When the tip came in, I handled it by the book, but I should have also been better about supporting you through it. I let the process become isolating, and that wasn't fair. "You were doing your job," I said. I was, but I could have done my job and also been a better human about it. That conversation meant more to me than he probably realized. At work, the cloud over my name gradually lifted. People stopped whispering. The awkwardness faded. I delivered strong results quarter after quarter, and eventually the investigation became just a footnote. Something that happened, was resolved, and was over. Margaret checked in on me regularly. We became genuine friends, not just professional acquaintances. She invited me to join the Business Alliance's mentorship program, where I started working with young women from backgrounds similar to mine, women who were trying to build careers without safety nets or family connections. That experience changed something in me. It reminded me why I'd worked so hard in the first place, not just for money or stability, but for proof. Proof that where you start doesn't have to be where you end. As for Vivian, the therapy continued. For months, actually. Derek spoke to Gerald regularly, and the updates were cautiously encouraging. Vivian was doing the work. She was confronting things about herself that she'd apparently never examined before. Her therapist recommended group therapy as well, specifically for people with patterns of manipulative behavior, and Vivian, to everyone's surprise, actually went. About 8 months after the gala, Vivian asked if she could write me a letter. Derek relayed the request, and I said yes. The letter arrived on a Friday. It was handwritten, 3 pages long. I won't share all of it because some things should stay private, but I'll share the part that mattered most to me. She wrote, "I have spent my whole life believing that I had to be above other people to be worth anything. When you came into Derek's life and you were everything I told myself people like you couldn't be, I couldn't handle it. Instead of admiring you, I tried to tear you down. What I did to your career was unforgivable, and I know that. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm ashamed." I read that letter 4 times. I cried twice. Not because I forgave her, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but because it felt like acknowledgement. After years of gaslighting and denial and being told I was oversensitive or ungrateful, someone was finally saying, "I did this. It was wrong. And it was about me, not you." Derek and I talked about whether to allow Vivian back into our lives. We decided on a trial basis. Supervised, boundaried, structured. She could come to dinner once a month. If she made a single comment about my background, my family, or my career, the dinner was over and the next one would be canceled. The first dinner was incredibly awkward. Vivian was stiff and overly polite, like she was following a script. Gerald kept trying to fill silences with weather observations. Derek watched his mother like a hawk. But nobody said anything cruel. Nobody took a shot. Nobody played games. The second dinner was slightly less awkward. By the third, Vivian actually asked me a question about my mentorship work and seemed genuinely interested in the answer. She even said, "That sounds like something I wish someone had done for me when I was young." It was a small thing, but it was real. I'm not going to pretend we became best friends. We didn't. There was too much damage for that, but we found a way to coexist. A cautious, careful peace built on boundaries and accountability. Derek and I came out of this stronger than I would have expected. The whole experience forced us to confront things we'd been avoiding. His tendency to minimize his mother's behavior. My tendency to absorb pain, silently, instead of demanding change. We started couples therapy, not because we were in crisis, but because we wanted to make sure we were building something solid enough to withstand whatever came next. I still think about that night at the gala sometimes. The podium, the silence, the way Vivian's face changed when she realized the walls she'd built around herself were made of glass and everyone could see through them. I don't regret it, not a single word. But I'll admit something. There's a part of me, a small part, that wishes it hadn't been necessary. That wishes I'd married into a family that accepted me from the start. That wishes my mother-in-law had looked at the girl from the wrong side of town and seen someone to be proud of, not someone to destroy. But life doesn't work that way, does it? You don't get to choose your battles. You just get to choose how you fight them. I chose to fight mine with the truth, and the truth won. For anyone out there dealing with a toxic in-law, someone who smiles at you while holding a knife behind their back, I want you to know something. You don't have to take it. You don't have to be the bigger person forever. Being the bigger person is admirable right up until it starts costing you your career, your health, or your sanity. Set your boundaries, document everything, and when the moment comes, and it will come, don't be afraid to stand up and speak. Your voice is yours. Nobody gets to take it from you. Not even family. One more thing, about a year after everything happened, I got a promotion, Senior VP of Finance. The board approved it unanimously. My boss told me afterward that it wasn't even a close vote. When I got home that night, Derek had flowers on the table. Not because he knew about the promotion, he'd just been thinking about me. I put the flowers in a vase and sat in my kitchen, in the house I bought with money I earned, in the life I built with my own 2 hands. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove. I was just home. I actually got a text from Margaret the next morning. She'd heard about the promotion through the business grapevine and just sent 3 words. You earned this. 3 words, but they hit differently coming from someone who'd stood beside me when it mattered most. Margaret didn't just help me at the gala because she was being strategic or because she enjoyed the drama. She helped because she believed in fairness. She believed that people who do the right thing should be protected and people who lie should be exposed. Simple as that. The world could use more Margaret Chens. I've been asked a few times since then whether I think Vivian genuinely changed or whether she's just performing again, doing the therapy and rehabilitation circuit because it's what she needs to do to maintain access to her son. Honestly, I don't know. I may never know. What I do know is that her behavior changed. The comments stopped. The manipulations stopped. She doesn't try to undermine me at family events anymore. She doesn't whisper behind my back, at least not that I've heard. And the last time we had dinner together, she told me that my mentorship program was genuinely impressive work and asked if there was a way she could volunteer. I almost laughed, not at her, but at the absurdity of the whole journey. 3 years of cruelty, 1 devastating false accusation, a gala confrontation, months of therapy, and now she wanted to volunteer for my program. I told her I'd think about it, and I actually did think about it. I haven't said yes yet, but I haven't said no either. People are complicated, even the ones who hurt you the worst. Derek's relationship with his mother is still healing. He visits her with me sometimes, and sometimes alone. He doesn't pretend what she did was okay. He doesn't minimize it anymore. But he also doesn't punish her endlessly for it. He found this balance that I admire, firm but not cruel, honest but not vindictive. He told me once, late at night when we were lying in bed and the house was quiet, I spent my whole life trying to make my mother happy. It took almost losing you to realize that her happiness was never my responsibility. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know about who my husband had become. Gerald and I have actually developed a real relationship. He comes over for coffee sometimes on Saturday mornings when Vivian has her therapy appointments. We sit on the porch and talk about nothing in particular. He tells me about the books he's reading. I tell him about the mentorship kids. It's easy and comfortable in a way that my relationship with Vivian may never be. He told me something once that stuck with me. He said, Vivian wasn't always like this. When I first met her, she was scared. Scared of being poor, scared of being invisible. Somewhere along the way, the fear turned into something else. I understood that more than he probably realized, because I had the same fears growing up. The The difference was, I channeled mine into building something. Vivian channeled hers into tearing things down. Two different responses to the same terror. Two completely different outcomes. I don't tell this story to be celebrated. I tell it because I spent too many years being quiet. Too many years smiling through insults and swallowing pain because I thought that's what being a good wife, a good daughter-in-law, a good person looked like. It doesn't. Being good doesn't mean being silent. Being kind doesn't mean being passive. And being patient doesn't mean being permanent. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for the person hurting you, is to stand up and say, enough. That's what I did. At a podium, in a navy blue dress, in front of 200 people, I said enough. And my life finally started to feel like mine again.